I'm very happy that you've all joined, and I'm really appreciate your presence here. Today, my topic is assessing the health challenges of smallholder farming households in Ghana. Before I start my presentation, I would like to say a big thanks to people who made it possible for me to be here today. And in that respect, I speak of my supervisor, Professor George Day, who has been an incredible support to me, as well as my thesis committee members, Professor Joaquin, Professor Samina, and the staff, student, and faculty of Department of Health and Society, who accepted me in their department and provided me the most incredible support I've ever had in my educational pursuits, especially to my postdoctoral supervisor, Professor Sekia, and as well as Professor Sova, and the head of department, Professor Ford. I'm very incredible. I mean, it's very incredible. As she mentioned earlier, my research interest is a little bit diverse, but I think currently I'm focusing on health equity, social and environmental justice. I also look at issues of international and rural development, as well as African indigenous knowledge and philosophy. So with that respect, in terms of African indigenous philosophy, I use proverbs, riddles, and folklores, African folklore in my research. So I think I have just two proverbs that I've used in my research that I want to share with you. And one has to do with the fact that it is a proverb from the people of Zimbabwe, which says, relationships are on their own never adequate. They are only made adequate by people sharing food. So which kind of cement the role of food in relationship building. And come to think of it, everything in human life is about relationship. Our relationship to our family, our neighbors, our workers, and what have you. And as my brother used to say, it's always good to maintain a good relationship with people. If you have a good relationship with people, you enjoy life. But if you have a bad relationship with people, you become a philosopher, always trying to explain why things happen the way they happen. And the second proverb is just to give Professor Silva a thumbs up, because when she invited me, she clearly highlighted the fact that this seminar is about cooperation and then how we bring our work together to ensure common good of society. And as you used to say, cooperation is the engine of development or success. So one man does not surround an anthill, which means that there's a limitation to our individual work. So when we bring our work together, we can achieve the goal that we want, or the maximum impact in the society. Okay, I will start by also briefly saying some few things that are some few previous researches that I've done in my academic career, first starting in 2003, where I did a study to assess the socioeconomic aspect of small ruminant production and marketing in the Greater Accra region. And my focus was to understand why people kept small ruminant in urban areas, because I was thinking it wasn't profitable because they will buy feed, they buy water, they may rent, place for the animal. Yet the price differential between the rural and urban is not that significant. So I wanted to know whether keeping small ruminant in urban area is profitable, or why, or what motivates people to keep small ruminant. In my research, I found a very strange thing. One, none of the respondents mentioned that he or she kept the small ruminant for food, but there are some reasons why they kept the small ruminant. One, I would say, is spiritual insurance. So, for example, the people believe that when you keep any animal at all and you are kind to the animal kind of absorb any calamity that intends to befall you as a person. So that keeping animal is a way of what? Having some insurance, health, spiritual insurance. Two has to do with the religious purpose. And the people believe that to be a leader, you must first keep animals so that you can translate the passion that you have for the animal into leading your subordinate, your group. So they will cite, for example, all the prophets, or most of the prophets were once shepherds in their lifetime. And then the third one I would say is working bank. Instead of people to keep their money into the bank, they rather will buy the small ruminant and then be using, feeding the animal so that in terms of any crisis, when they need funds, they can easily sell the animal and then use the money to address their problems. So in 2012, I also did a study in my MPhil studies where I look at the food security status of smallholder farming households in the central region of Ghana. And one of the objectives was to compare the food security status of farming households in the forest areas and the farming households in the coastal areas. And what I realized was that farming households in the forest areas were more food secure compared to their counterparts in the coastal. And one of the reasons is that they have several indigenous food which grow widely in the forest. And so those foods serve as a buffer stock in time of food scarcity. So I asked them, why are they not producing those food to sell to the urban areas where there are pockets of food insecurity? And the response was that people in the urban areas consider those food as poor people's food. So even when they sell, they don't buy. But my study didn't look at the nutritious or the health benefit of those food. So when I had opportunity to do another master's MA at OISE, I decided to look at African indigenous food crops, their role in combating chronic illnesses. And what I found was that most of the African indigenous food crops have what we call the phytochemicals, as well as also antioxidants, which help to minimize or prevent chronic illnesses. So my PhD thesis is, I will sum it up as an amalgamation of all the studies that I've done throughout my academic pursuit. So I decided to assess the indigenous food systems towards environmental sustainability, education, and development. Three issues emerged in my research, mostly have to do with environment, health, and development. But for this presentation, I intend to focus merely on the health aspect of it. And most of the health aspect has to do with agrochemicals. So just to give a brief background of agrochemical, Africa is one of the countries that use least amount of agrochemicals. And as it states, Africa accounts for just 2 to 4% of global pesticide market. Of course, this figure excludes the quantity of pesticide or agrochemicals that are donated to Africa. However, unsafe chemical use practices are high in Africa, mostly. And I will attribute this to, for example, the small farm sizes in most African countries relative to the other Western countries. Because, for example, which gives the farmers direct access to come into contact with chemicals. So, for example, when you look at average farm size in Canada, it's 778 acres as of 2018. And then average farm size in the US is 421. But 90% of Ghanaian farmers cultivate either 5 acres or less. So which kind of tell you how it's unprofitable to, use big machinery to do other stuff. But what is clear or abundantly clear is that agrochemical use is increasing in Africa. And some of the reasons which we'll just know in a bit. So in this presentation, I'll attempt to answer these questions. What factors motivate smallholder farming households in Ghana to use agrochemicals? And what safety precautions or unsafe chemical use practices can be found in the community? But before I go on, I would like to explain this first, because most of the time when I present my work, those who know me coming from OISE, an educational institution, ask me, what has your work got to do with education? And I always ask them, so how do you define education? And in their definition, I realize most of the time they refer to schooling instead of education. So I use Zulu definition of education, which says education is intergenerational transmission of culture, values, and cumulative knowledge of society. So if education is transmission of values or culture, then perhaps the question we should ask ourselves as academics, is whose values are we teaching the learners? And to what extent are we receptive to the learners' values or cultures? So that's why there talks about decolonizing the academy, as well as Paul Ongola talks about multiversity instead of the university. Now I'll go to my theoretical framework. I use 3 theoretical frameworks in my research. One is the political ecology, which seeks to understand political dynamics surrounding material and discusses struggle over the environment in the developing countries. And I use political economy because it addresses issues of gender inequality, racism, as well as social oppression in corporate force systems. I also use anti-colonial theory, which provides insight into the role of food in colonization and empowers individuals to resist acculturation and erosion of traditional culture. I used anti-colonial broadly to refer to anything that is dominating, not necessarily something foreign. These 2 theoretical frameworks, political ecology and anti-colonial theory, provide a poignant critique of the corporate force system. However, they are limited in terms of their suggestion of alternative force system that can address some of the environmental challenges that we face. So I use indigenous knowledge in order to provide an alternative way of, food system that we can address some of the environmental challenges. So indigenous knowledge constitutes a core of community development process in agriculture, the preservation of food, collection and storage of water, animal husbandry, as well as ethnic veterinary medicine. So this indigenous knowledge will also give me the access to use African indigenous philosophy like the proverbs, like the riddles and folklore in my analysis of my work. Then come to conceptual framework. And as we all know, conceptual framework are systems of concepts or ideas of, words or terminologies that guide a research design. So in my research, the overarching goal is to assess full system, but in order to, and specifically, I'm trying to analyze the indigenous food systems. But to understand indigenous food system, then I must first of all juxtapose it against the conventional or the corporate food system for us to be able to understand what I mean by indigenous food system. So I argue that indigenous food system is supported by 2 concepts. One is spirituality. So what do I mean by spirituality? Spirituality here, I mean the connection people have to their land and the organism that they classify as food, which results in an ordinary respect to the organism that is considered as food. So, for example, when we talk about spirituality, the indigenous people believe that animals sacrifice their life to save the life of humans. And such sacrifice must be respected by consuming less animal product only if necessary, and also avoid wastage by harvesting more than required. To understand this, maybe I have to unpack the corporate food system and how it relates to, for example, consumption of meat and stuff. So, for example, in America alone, in United States, annually 9 billion chickens, just chicken, 9 billion are slaughtered annually, which translates, when you do your calculations, about 2.5 million chicken a day. That's just a chicken. Different other animal. And this chicken, in 2007, 58.6% of the corn that were produced in the United States were used to feed just animals. And when we do our calculations in terms of maybe economic analysis, it takes in 3 to 10 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of meat. So which means in the first place, there's energy wastage. And for those who may think that, okay, you take the food so that, meat, enough meat so that you get protein, nutritionists have made us to understand that the body can take certain amount of protein at any time, certain quantity of protein. So for example, they stated the body can take between 20 to 30 grams of protein. Any extra protein will be converted back to energy. So it means when you take more meat, it's not translate to getting more protein. Actually, the body converts the meat back to the energy, which you can obtain cheaply. So that's why Detla explained that the present, food in the United States is basically meat with less periphery carbohydrate. And this is very relevant because it's also have implication on our fight against climate change. As we all know, for example, animals are one of the areas where they emit greenhouse gases, and then that results in the climate change, which affect the people who, less contribute to the climate change. So that's just a little bit for us to understand. So I will move forward with sustainability. Then sustainability, what I mean here is that to invest in nature and harvest part of the accrued interest without ever touching the principal. So this is slightly different from conventional definition of what sustainability, which says for us to meet our needs without compromising the needs of the future generation. So basically, such kind of definition of sustainability means to be able to exploit the earth perpetually. That's the focus, which is a little bit different. Then I also argue that for conventional food system, is governed or supported by two concepts. One is globalization, and two is capitalism. So there's this excitement about globalization. And the argument is that the world has become a global village. We are connected to each other than before. So we must gravitate towards cultural homogeneity by eating the same kind of food, wearing the same kind of dress, and then listening to the same kind of music. So as a result, food are crisscrossed from other parts of the world, from Africa to, from Europe to Africa and whatever. It's being crisscrossed without looking at the carbon footprint of this kind of crisscrossing. And when you look at, when you analyze globalization carefully, you will realize that globalization basically is the imposition of Western culture on non-Western people, because the way the transfer is mostly absorbing the Western cultures. That's why Detla will talk about Coca-Colization of Africa, and then Schrader will talk about McDonaldization of Africa. So the direction of movement is just in one direction. So that's what we have to know. But my theory is the case is that globalization is basically to create a bigger market for capitalists, our capitalism to thrive. So here brings the concept of capitalism, where I mean here is that to maximize profits out of minimum amount of variable input. So when the focus of food production is profit. Definitely, we know profit is total revenue minus total cost. So to increase profit, you have to reduce cost. And when you reduce cost, you compromise people's health. So that is what I argue. Then this will bring us to the idea or the terminology of food security. And I argue, the food security works through variables. One is food availability. So the food should be available all year round, but it doesn't care where the food comes from. And then accessibility, people should have access to the food they want, or should have land to grow their own food. And third is utilization, not only having access to the food, but also to have some ingredient to combine with the food to make it consumable. But when you look at the indigenous food system, we talk about food sovereignty. So food sovereignty basically is the right of nations to control their own food system, the mode of production, and their food market. And I argue here that food sovereignty is governed or supported by three concepts. One is food self-sufficiency, where people produce their own food to feed themselves. And then democracy, where I mean people have the right to choose what they call food, determine their own food. An anthropologist, Mr. Salis, argued that the world would have witnessed an entirely different set of agriculture if, for example, the Western world ate dogs and horses, and both are edible in other parts of the world. Yes, it will sound weird that somebody is eating dog, but you are okay to eat beef. But when you go to India among Hindus, it's like taboo to eat, beef. So who determines what food is? It's something that we can think about. Then I also talk about diversity. What do I mean by diversity? Diversity means to have a variety of food to choose from. So for example, FAO statistics suggest that since human adopted farming or agriculture, we've isolated 7,000 species of crops that are considered as food, and 15,000 species of animals that are also considered as food. But currently, only 30 crops are considered food on global market. And then less than 0.5% of species of animal considered as food. So basically, we are shrinking our food base, which can also have implications on the environment. So I argue that this indigenous food system are supported by some bedrocks. One is the culture and tradition. And one example of tradition that I can mention of is the system of totem. So for example, in Africa, people have an organism or a crop or anything that represents their totems. And people jealously protect their totem. And in this respect, they expect that, for example, if your totem is antelope, you don't eat the meat of antelope, or you don't sit on the skin of antelope. And it's expected that antelope will not also destroy your crop, because antelope consider you as one of his own, right? So this system, what it does is that at least at any point in time, certain organisms are protected by certain group or ethnic groups. So it prevents extinction of organisms, which can be exploited. And now talk about care of nature, and then we talk also about beliefs. For example, that I give is the sacred grove, where they found out that sacred groves stabilize the microclimate in areas where they are usually located. When we talk about then the conventional food system, so also is supported by something like subsidy. So Vandana Shiva was right when she argued that subsidy to industrial agriculture has made the price of conventional food to be cheaper than the cost of production. And the rare food, which is organic food, food that are produced without chemicals, has become the preserve of the rich. And then we talk also about, let me see, block this time. Okay, then we talk about cheap energy. So everything in the conventional food system is dependent on oil. And as we all know, oil is exhaustible natural resources. And there are predictions that are from 2050, we should have the existing oil stock in the earth to decline. And I also talk about supported by externalized costs, which means farmers, they don't factor in the environmental cost in their production. So they externalize the cost to the consumers whilst they keep the profit. So this will lead us to the development of, the understanding of development in Western concept, which basically means accumulation of material resources leading to economic gain, and the development in indigenous concept, which is basically relationship and the respect of culture and tradition. Now I can go on to our methodology. So these are the characteristics of the research area. The study was done in Ghana, and Ghana has 7 agroecological zones. And these 7 agroecological zones can also be divided into 3. One, we have the middle belt, which is a transitional zone, and then area above the middle belt can be called Guinea savanna or dry areas. And the area here at the southern part, we can call it the forest area. So in my research, I selected 1 district here in the, south, 1 district in the middle belt, that the transitional zone, and 1 district in the northern sector, which is more the dry area, to get a complete picture of the situation. So in terms of land size, Ghana is 1/5 of the province of Ontario. And when we want to compare it to Canada, it's 1/43. So it means you have to multiply the land size of Ghana by 43 times to be able to get the size of Canada, which means Ghana is a very small country comparatively. And then the population is 31 million, and majority of farmers are smallholder farmers, which means they only grow full crops to feed their family and they sell the surplus. And on average, there's an increase in temperature 1 degree Celsius from 1960 to 2010, which has implication on the farmers. There's also only 1% of the arable land is under irrigation, which means most of the farmers depend on the benevolence of nature. And so the study is a mixed method study, but I focus mainly on the qualitative aspect of it. So it follows the same, normal qualitative procedure. For example, I did interviews, focus group, I also did survey, participant observation, and whatever. But what I want to point out is that workshop was originally not part of my research or methodology, but when I went to the field and I realized there were a lot of misinformation, I decided to put together some experts and team so that we conducted a workshop in various communities that we visited. In all, I selected 105 farmers, people or participants, 91 farmers, 5 educators, teachers, and extension officers, 5 students, 2 experts, 1 representative of FAO Ghana, and then 1 representative of Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana. I also review relevant government documents in Ghana in my analysis. Now coming to my findings. So I found out that 85% of the farmers use one agrochemicals or the other. However, their knowledge in terms of the active ingredients of the chemicals, the concentrations of the chemicals, as well as even sometimes the brand, is very, very limited. These are the factors that motivate smallholder farmers to use agrochemical. One has to do with activities of NGOs. So most NGOs, let me close this again. Most NGOs in Ghana are there introducing, or some of the farmers were introduced to maybe hybrid seeds or use of fertilizer by the NGOs. And normally, fertilizer, when you apply it the first time, you get a higher yield. So it motivates the farmers. But what they don't tell the farmers is that there is what we call diminishing marginal returns. The higher you put chemicals or fertilizer in the soil, the less it decreases your productivity. As time goes on, the soil becomes acidic and you can no longer grow crops on the land. The second factor is government policy. I think in 2008, the government introduced what it's called fertilizer subsidy. So basically, what it entails is that government gives farmers coupon. So they use this coupon to buy chemicals and pay half of the price, and then they give the coupon to the chemical sellers, and then the chemical sellers also take the coupons to government to take the half. So this policy motivated some farmers to use agrochemicals, basically the fertilizer, but not only fertilizer. It's also made them to use other agrochemicals such as pesticides and weedicide and whatever. And it's in a way also hampers the work of some extension officers who wanted to educate farmers on the need to do organic farming, because if you are, telling, they told me, if you are telling the farmer that do organic farming, then the farmer will ask you, if chemicals are not good, then why is the government promoting it? So it becomes a very nice situation there. And the third factor is no or low cost of labor. That's rural-urban migration most of the communities where the youth move to the urban areas in search of white-collar jobs. And the few who are there charge either higher price to clear your farm, or they just take a lot of jobs and then work intense. So by the time sometimes they will get to one particular farmer, the planting season has already passed. So what the farmers do is that they just buy agrochemicals. So I want to just read this quote and then emphasize something here. It is very difficult to get a laborer to clear your farm. We don't have many laborers here because of that, when we buy Roundup and others, we spray the weeds. For instance, when I fix the knapsack at my back, I can spray 1 acre. So this is Alice, a woman, a single mother who uses Roundup to kind of clear her weeds. What I want to emphasize here is that the active ingredient of Roundup is glyphosate. And this glyphosate has been found to be carcinogenic, meaning it can cause cancer. And according to CNN, somebody even sued Monsanto for about 200 million or something because the person used Roundup and got cancer. So and these farmers are using these chemicals without even PPE. So who is going to speak for them when they encounter those challenges? The other aspect is the environmental challenges, as mostly due to climate change. Farmers now experience erratic rainfall, and sometimes the rain period is very short, which they find it very difficult to cultivate crops without the use of fertilizer, as one farmer will, want to argue out here that without the fertilizer, he cannot produce any chemicals. But what the farmers have forgotten to know is that most of the seeds that they use are hybrid seeds, and the hybrid seeds are also bred to adapt to chemicals. So basically, the environment is there, but also the type of seed they use is also another factor. Then fifth one is competition from other farmers, competition among farmers. So for example, when farmer who decide to do organic farming, look at his colleague and realize that his colleague is using chemicals and his crops are doing well. And then he also try to imitate those colleagues. And for example, if a farmer is doing organic farming and all the surrounding farmers are using chemicals, that's what we call risk sharing. So all the insects that move from the field that use chemical will end up coming to the organic farmer and destroy his or her crops. So which is also a big issue that I found. But basically, the farmers actually argue that their challenges are mostly due to the fact that they've lost all their indigenous seeds. Most of their indigenous seeds that they use, which are, resistant to some of the climatic factors, are responsible for their predicament at the moment, and they cannot go back to their old seeds because most of the seeds are now going to extinct. In terms of chemical use practices, what I found out is that the knowledge of safety precaution is very limited among the farmers. For example, farmers spray their farm without the proper PPEs, and secondly, they don't observe what we call the re-entry period. Normally, when you spray a farm, you have to wait for at least 48 hours before you enter the farm again. But farmers spray their farm, stay on the farm, prepare their food, eat, and then go back and come back the following day. And then some also spray chemicals against the wind, which is not the right method because the wind will blow the chemicals to the direction of the farmer. And some also have a mixture or cocktail of chemicals. For example, some mix fertilizer with agrochemicals with the hope that the fertilizer will provide nutrient to the crop, and the chemicals will also kill the insects or kill the weeds. But what they fail to realize is that in basic chemistry, when two compounds react, they can produce a product which is different from both compounds. So it depends on which fertilizer or which chemical they are combining can produce different result. But they do experiment that, and then when it works for them, they spread it, and other farmers also imitate them. Some, they call themselves professional sprayers, go to the extent of, testing the concentration of chemical with their tongue, which is very, very deadly, very, very, very deadly. I don't know how they do that, but it's happening. And that's a lot of information which I found. For example, this is what Dawuni said. These farmers use, for example, some powdered substance or chemicals to preserve their maize. And ideally, when you mix the maize with a chemical, you have to wait for 4 months before the chemical disintegrates from the mixture, before you can use the maize as food. But when I asked one participant, so are you aware that the chemical you are using can have health effects on you? This is what he said. The chemical kills insects or any living organism that has no blood in its system. So once you don't have blood, you die when you come into contact with the chemical. So I believe that weevils and other things don't have blood. So apart from that, any animal or human being, when you consume, once you have blood, it has no effect. And I don't know the mechanism by which a chemical can work in that way. But this is some of the information that the farmers are getting. And it's not strange because I realize that even some of the farmers themselves sell agrochemicals. And when you buy agrochemical, you need an information about it. And as most of the farmers cannot read, it's very difficult to follow the safety precautions. So it's a huge problem in the community. In terms of health implications, I observed just 2 things. One has to do with chemical poisoning. As for example, Alice will say, yes, sometimes I fall sick after spraying. And if I do not do it, I will not get anybody to do it for me. So after spraying, they experience chemical poison such as vomiting and coughing and whatever. And the second is to do with they have low self-reported health. And strangely, the men accuse the women of putting too much salt or Maggi cube in their diet. And the women also accuse the men for not eating food that doesn't contain Maggi cube. So it became a chicken and egg situation whilst we were doing the workshop. In conclusion, what I would say is that agrochemical use practices among smallholder farmers in Ghana have serious and negative health implications. And I would rather prefer that the farmers explore the indigenous method of pest control and pest and disease control and management. However, in absence of that, I think government also has to, I'm still in the conclusion. Farmers use agrochemicals based on necessity. Some farmers use agrochemicals based on necessity and not necessarily because they like it. And third, farmers have limited knowledge about safety precautions associated with the use of agrochemicals. And so my recommendation are that one, government should regulate the activities of the NGO. For example, I would suggest that the NGO should work in hand with the Ministry of Agriculture so that they can be supervised as to the kind of information they give farmers. And I will encourage the farmers to explore indigenous methods of pest and disease control. Because what I found out, the strangely is that the farmers have a leaf, they call it yini, in the north. And they use this leaf to preserve maize, and it works perfectly. But they abandoned that and started using chemical because they think it's modern. And I asked those who use the leaves, so why are you not telling your colleagues that you are using the leaves? And their response is that, well, if they don't come and ask me, why will I worry myself if they don't want to know? So it's a way, I think we can explore other indigenous ways of what? Preventing pests and disease rather than concentrating on the use of agrochemicals. And I also encourage the government or the public to use, intensify public education. For example, what I found out is that the consumers even prefer crops that were grown with the chemicals because they look fresh and the organic crops look very tiny. So when the consumers go to the market, they select the bigger ones. And the farmers go to the farm and they see that, oh, the consumers, that's what they want. If this is what you want, then we provide it for you. So if the consumers will also know that if you go to the market and you see tiny crops, doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. That one is a healthier one, it's the organic one. So if they get to know and they demand that, it will also help. And for example, farmers don't also have what we call the premium price for organic foods. Like in this Western world, organic foods cost a little bit higher than the conventional one. So if the organic food in Ghana will also have a little bit of higher price, it will motivate farmers to grow, food organically, rather than concentrating on the use of agrochemicals. So the way forward and acknowledgement. So now I think I'm done my research, and what is left is dissemination. And this platform, I thank the Department of Health Society for providing me this platform for this kind of dissemination. I intend to go to Ghana also to back to the farmers. That's a promise that I made to them. And what I want to do is that I want to meet the farmers, talk to them, and then together with the farmers and the extension officers, I want us to create a training manual for this. For training of farmers, so that they will know the bad effect of chemicals and whatever, and also how to value their own indigenous food. Because during my research, I found that they were surprised that somebody from Canada, telling them about using indigenous food. And they were telling me, wow, this is strange. We think the color of the food, when it's red, or when it's this, that's the better. We don't like the green. So, and now that we know, we will go back to so I can see that the people are willing to change if they get the right information. So I created my small, I'll call family and friends organization, which I name it Farmers Friend. So normally what we do is when there's any issue, then I'll call my colleagues, some of them who are professors in Ghana and who are experts in various fields in Ghana. I just call them, this is the issue, volunteer or time. So we go there and we do that. So what we want to do is education initiative, as I said. So we want to create a manual and then use it to educate people. And I realized that tree planting is also very, very important. Trees, those who grow trees there, for example, most of the indigenous crop like yam, they can't grow them because of the weather. And what I found is that those who grow trees on their farm, they are able to produce those indigenous, so maybe if you get a seedlings to the farmers and what have you, I think it will help a little bit. This is my way of also giving back to my community, which they've done so much for me. So I think I'll plan on doing that. And if anybody know any source of funding which I can apply to do that, I also welcome. And Professor Seki, I know you will be on, definitely. So that's by the way. All right, so in my conclusion, I would thank the farmers, the teachers who share their knowledge with me, as well as the students, the district directors of agriculture who also helped me in my research, extension officers, friends and family, and the individual from organization who supported my research back in Ghana. And I also thank the University of Toronto Graduate School for paying my plane ticket and accommodation, which made me comfortable to do my research back in Ghana. So I would say Asante Sana in Swahili, merci in French, for those who understand French, Medase is in Ghana, Akan. And thank you for coming. I really appreciate your presence. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think on behalf of all the participants, we're so grateful for your talk. And I really want to shift gears quickly to see if there are any questions, comments. I would like to invite the group to unmute yourself and share. And if it gets out of line, I'll step in. But or if you need some help unmuting, please let me know. But let's take a few minutes to see if there's any questions.
Okay.
So I would start off. I wouldn't say I have a question. Hi, everyone. My name is Mame. But
Oh,
first and foremost, I just want to say very, very great, amazing job, Dr. Demi, you did. I
thank
think
you.
you spoke on an expedient topic, especially when it comes to the importance of acknowledging culturally responsive, let's say, foods and culturally sensitive foods
Yeah.
that we need to become accustomed to. So thank you very much for sharing that. I love the proverbs that you included in the beginning. It's
Okay.
very insightful and a fun way to start us off. So great job. And I'd like to see how this turns out in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mommy.
I have a question.
Hello. Hello.
Mm.
Yes. This is Judith. Thank you, Demi. I just need clarity on one of your recommendations.
Okay.
It was about exploring indigenous methods, diseases.
Okay.
Yes, I just need clarity on that. Thank you. Otherwise, that was excellent. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Professor, can I go to, can I explain that? Okay, sure.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I was saying that they can explore indigenous method of disease and pest control. The reason why I said that is that I did farm visits. And when I went to the farm and I saw how pests were destroying people's crop, I was amazed. And so you can't blame the farmers for using chemicals too much, because they were just destroying the crop just like that. But there are indigenous methods. For example, the women were growing vegetables, and they will mix ash with animal feces and spread it around the crop, and it prevents any other insects from destroying their crop. But you can't, because it's you need a lot of ashes, which essentially means you have to burn some firewood, right? It's also had an impact. So I think they can explore. And I also talked about the leaf we call the yini, in the north, where when the farmers use it, what they do is that they put the yini, in a sack and pour the maize on it to a certain level and put another layer of yini and pour the maize, and it preserves the maize amazingly, even better than the chemicals. But people don't use it. So I think there are more that we can explore, right? So that's why I'm saying they should explore, more areas of the indigenous method of pest and disease control. Thank you, Judith from Uganda. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go for it, Humu.
Yeah.
Oh.
So hi, I'm Humu. I'm calling in from Ottawa here in Canada.
Oh, Humu.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. That was an interesting presentation. After listening to the whole presentation, I just have a question, because from what you are telling, I know that I am a Ghanaian too, so I'm from Ghana. I've lived there. I noticed that most of these farmers live in communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they work together as a team. There's that kind of association within communities.
Mm-hmm.
And these people are led by, they have local rural leaders that help to initiate changes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key thing or interesting thing that I'm looking with your research, I know it wasn't covered in your presentation, is the role of the rural leaders in ensuring or helping out with these issues there. I know that you talked about lack of knowledge with respect to the type of chemicals that are used there as one of the things. And also you did mention one of your recommendations with respect to training.
Yeah.
You know, we want to see how these, like, even if you create these training manuals for them, how will these things will really be used? Because at the end of the day, having a manual does not fulfill the purpose of actually it being utilized by the people. And how this can help, like leaders can play a very good role instead of looking at it from the government level, but how we can use our own rural leaders to initiate this kind of change.
Yeah, that's very, very
so
interesting.
It's just something that I was thinking about, and I know maybe it could be like a future research kind of thing, but I think so to be a very interesting area to look into. with respect to putting leadership into this context or this problem, you know?
Yeah, so that's wonderful. So I made mention that I use indigenous knowledge theory. And so why I use indigenous knowledge theory is to inform my research. So in some of the communities I visited, we first of all contacted the leaders. So there is the leaders who introduced us to the community. And in one of my slides, you can see a picture there in a community picture. Any community that we go and there's a chief, we go to the chief directly. Or, I mean, when I was doing the research. So sometimes we went to the chief directly and we asked the chief permission to meet with the people. And the essence is that the knowledge that we will share or the workshop that we will, the thing that we discuss will remain in the community. And then the second thing is that I went with the extension officers. So everything that we did, they are going to replicate even after I've left. And in terms of the manual, that's why I said I don't want to sit here and then create the manual. So that's why I want to go to the field, and then with the extension officers and the farmers, and we all decide which kind of information would they require in order to create the manual. So the manual is not something that I'm creating now. It's something that I'm planning to go there, and then during my dissemination, we all discuss and find ways, because as you know, we said 2 years are better than 1. So we all share ideas, and then also pick information from the farmers as to what relevant information they want to see in the manual. So the manual is a work in progress. Nothing has been started so far. So thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Umu.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Debbie.
Yes.
Thank you so much for amazing presentation.
Thank you.
I am so moved with this presentation. My name is Fatmata.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a question, but I want to know, you talk about the acidic soil, which chemical or fertilizer causes on the farm. And coming from Africa, I'm a Sierra Leonean, and I saw a lot of food shortage, and people are struggling. I knew there is something that they call boundaries on farming.
Okay.
And if a farmer has used this fertilizer, and now their farm has become acidic, crops cannot grow to the level of a farmer where they can make profit. How would we come with narrative or advice to those farmers as to what to do with that soil to become productive again?
Okay. So that's a very, very brilliant question. Thank you very much. So normally, to address, acidic soil, we have, by scientific, we are acid-based. So if you want to neutralize the acid, you have to add base. So we have something we call alkaline. So for example, wood ashes are alkaline. So by spreading wood ashes in the soil, it neutralizes the acidic. And secondly, what normally it happens is that when you grow the land and it becomes acidic, what you have to do is to allow it to fallow. Meaning you are allowed, stop growing crop on it for a year or 2, so that the leaves will grow, their leaves will rot, and then replenish the soil again. But there's another problem here. Most Africa, the land is a customary land. And people, land belongs to, for example, a family. So the fact that your father has been given a portion of land, that is what you and the offspring will have. So what is happening is that as the family grows, the land size becomes smaller for each family.
Yes.
And so that's what caused the farmers to do what we call the continuous cropping on the same piece of land, time in and time in and again. But there are other methods again, like the spread of organic manure on the surface of the soil. spreading of animal feces on the surface of the soil. That's, and the other organic matter. They are the, indigenous way that we know help to replenish the soil when it becomes acidic. So I think farmers themselves also have a lot of indigenous ways, but it's just that maybe we have to go there and let them, share their knowledge with them, with us, and then promote it so that they see it. Because I think some farmers use chemicals because they see it as a modern trend of farming. So there was a farmer who said, we don't farm like our forefathers do. Now, when you spray, by the following day, but they don't consider effects on them, because mostly they grow crops to feed themselves. So that's yeah. There are various ways of neutralizing an acidic soil. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Demi. Just a quick one. Yes.
Okay.
I was looking at the indigenous way of planting and also the indigenous prevention methods. So just wondering, because where I'm coming from, Uganda, East Africa, there's when they used indigenous ways, they should have used indigenous crops. But now in the scenario of pesticides, they have introduced GMOs. Okay. I don't know about the scenario in Ghana. And secondly, in your recommendations, the smallholder farmers and people that put food on the table in the African context, in most cases they are women.
Yeah.
I would recommend for your recommendations to work out. I'm just thinking aloud whether you can bring in a gender transformative approach for the recommendations to work out.
Gender, right?
Gender transformative approach, yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I think I have I think, is it a 10, my thesis is 430 pages, and I have about, 15 pages recommendation, and certainly I cannot see everything here now. So I'll also include this one in addition to what I already have. Thank you very much. I know you also work in that area.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful.
It's William here.
Okay. Oh, William, okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Demi. That was insightful, and your presentation actually sent me back home. I'm also from Ghana, as you know. And thank you for throwing light on the brainwashing that is going on. Our farmers have been brainwashed for years, and research such as yours, is needed to really reset things. Yeah, we believe too much in what the Westerners tell us. It's about time that we begin to realize that we actually have something so good. And so we have to hold on to what we have. Of course, learn from what is out there also to improve your situation. But taking things wholesale when they pass them on to us because it's coming from the West is something that, research like yours will help to inform people to really be more intelligent when they are taking decisions. So thank you so much for your research.
Thank you very much, Brother William.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question. I was wondering about what water security is like among your participants in the region, and if potentially water sources might be another source of exposure to pesticides from runoff. If that came up at all during your research.
Yes, in my environmental aspect of the research, it's a huge problem, especially in the northern part of Ghana. Most of the communities that I visited, water is very, very scarce there. And as a result, women spent between 1 to 3 hours to just get 1 bucket of water. So they spend their whole life searching for water, and they can't engage in any academic and economic activity. So that's why mostly the poverty in the northern part is 2 times than what is in the south. Yeah. And with regards to the water, in the same thing, those farmers, for example, who use chemicals, pesticides and whatever in their farming, sometimes they farm along the streams, right? And some of them collect water directly from the stream and with the chemicals, right? They just dip everything, chemical container in the water, and then collect the water to mix their chemicals. When they finish, sometimes they throw it away on the floor. And this can be washed back into the water. And it's a whole lot of problem too in the area. So thank you for bringing that out. I capture it very extensively in my other chapter of the research.
Thank you.
Dr. Demi.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. That was great. Just 2 points I wanted to just touch on. It's rather unfortunate that as quote unquote Africa becomes modern, there are important cultural things that are being left out. So, for example, among the people you interviewed, I know they had what we call a Nobwa, which is communities come together to help each one farm, clear their land, which was quite easy. But unfortunately now it's out.
Exactly.
Right? He does that. So it's rather unfortunate that we are taking the wrong side of what I call modernization. And it's killing our economy, and it's killing our health, and it's killing basically everything we do. I remember the last time I visited Ghana, I went to look for the local mango fruit. And it took me 2 or 3 hours drive.
Wow.
To get the local one. Now all the local trees are being destroyed, and they are planting those that are good for exporting to Europe and North America, which is very sad. And one thing I wanted to touch base and ask is, you talked about planting of trees.
Yeah.
Which type of trees were they planted? Because my fear is that can also be influenced, that people plant trees that in few years will also be commercialized. Are those trees that are being planted for posterity, or being planted for environmental sake, or those are trees that are being planted so that in future they could be harvested again?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Dako. I really appreciate your comment. So yeah, for the trees, I think it's a part of my recommendation. And the reason why I did that recommendation is that when you go to northern part of Ghana, where they produce most of the indigenous crops like millet, sorghum, yam, and whatever, they cannot grow them any longer. Why? Because the weather is not favorable. And when I ask people, why can't you grow? They say, oh, now we can't grow because the weather, the temperature is too high and whatever. And throughout my discussion or interview, I found one farmer who said that he was experiencing that. So later he thought that, okay, he has one land. He decided to use that land to grow trees. And then when he did that, he's now able to grow yam in the same community where others cannot grow. So, and I think some of the trees that this farmer grow is acacia. And acacia basically is like a flowering plant, had this kind of yellow flowers, and they can easily be cut and then it will rejuvenate or regenerate again. So that's why I think we should try as much as possible to let farmers know that they should cultivate a lot of trees on their farm. But I also encounter a lot of tree thefts. Sometimes a farmer who want to kind of grow trees, then his colleague farmer will end up cutting the tree in the night to use it to build their houses and whatever. So, and this can be done with the help of maybe the chief or something. So that there should be proper education among the community that, for example, if somebody cuts tree, you don't have to cut. Somebody plants tree, you don't have to cut somebody's tree and that kind of thing. So, yeah, thank you very much for drawing my attention to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'm mindful that we are at the time that we committed to.
Good.
And I want to see if there's any last questions that anyone wants to ask or comments. I never know how long to pause when we're on the on the online.
I think there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, there's been quite a few that are
quite a few. I saw the first one pop up. I'll read it to you, Dr. Demi, and you can respond. Dr. Demi, I find your articulation of globalization interesting. If I got you right, you theorize that it is the imposition of Western culture and influence over non-Western other. My comprehension of globalization is that it is the processes of socioeconomic expansion of different societies across international borders and the influence of these expansions on other societies. Question, how and where do you position the expansion of the non-Western economies, for example, businesses in Africa, operating internationally between and among African countries or with Asian countries, non-Western societies?
Okay. All right. If I understand her, I mean, the questioner very well, the question is talking about African business or something, where African business is...
Yeah, I think they're trying to I think they're interested in your definition of globalization as sort of Westernization or McDonaldization, like the terms you use, or Western, the kind of hegemony. And they're asking you where you see in this understanding or conceptualization of globalization the role of, I'm paraphrasing, so whoever read this, maybe they can jump in, but the role of sort of businesses in Africa that are operating not just internationally, but also between African countries and with other Asian countries, how you see that positioned in this, in your sort of conceptualization of globalization, maybe a different kind of globalization, perhaps.
Well, so I think I was cautious not to define globalization. So what I said is that my theory is that globalization is the imposition of Western culture and values and whatever. So, for example, I did mention the fact that, for example, because of globalization, we are forced to eat the same food everywhere, wear the same clothes. But when you analyze it, you realize that it's most of the Western culture that we are imbibing in most of the developed countries. Yeah, businesses move up and down, and I also talk about capitalism, right? So businesses move on, but the fact that African, how do I position maybe African business elsewhere? So what I want to just highlight is that the restrictions that African business have in Western countries is not the same restriction that the Western business have in African countries. So for example, most of the bigger companies in Africa, Western companies in Africa, they are completely exploit the environment. And although there are some laws, but they don't follow the law to the letter. But any African country that goes into the West, you really know that you really following the laws of the land in terms of environment and whatever. And why you also even think of it, most of the, I mean, especially I'm just looking for somebody to educate me on which type of African businesses are in, for example, in the West. I've not come across many. After all, I've not come across. If I'm willing to learn which of the African companies, like for example, oil company or mining company, or which African company is in the West. That's, I don't know much about that. So yeah, businesses are there, but as far as if business will only follow the rules of environmental sustainability and culture of the people, then yeah, because no place is an island. We all depend on each other. But when you go to a certain community and you see how exploitation is going on, for example, in Ghana, there's issue of mining, and mostly foreign companies mining in Ghana, destroying the water of the local farmers. Farmers cannot even have water to drink. They destroy the land. Farmers cannot have place to cultivate crops and whatever. So many. Just read. I mean, it's spread everywhere. I have not seen any African business which is doing that in the West. As far as I'm concerned, I'm still learning, so I'm so, you point me to that direction, I'll welcome to look at it.
And Dr. Demi, if I can add something to what you just said, you know, the question we even have to ask ourselves is, even if it's within African countries, the concept of globalization, what processes underpins the organizations? Most of these companies or organizations that are owned by Africans rules those organizations. These are rules. They follow the same systematic capitalist orientation, just like any Western country, right? If we want to go back, how did indigenous people trade? How did indigenous people exchange goods? The barter system, right? Where people took what they need and what they didn't need, they let it go, right? But even if their businesses set up in Africa, in Ghana, in Togo, in Ivory Coast, what are the principles that are underpinned?
Yeah, exactly.
So it could be that it's owned by a local person, but still be run by a Western globalist orientation.
Yeah,
which is just for the profit of whoever started it, and nobody gets anything else. So I think that is where I could see your definition coming from. That it's basically a westernized system that is even ruling Africa. So it can be a black person doing it, but what principle is the person basing on it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you very much for the explanation.
That was good. I can always, let me also just add something to it with respect to globalization.
Okay.
I know, like, the way we have, like, that's why you say you were a little bit kind of cautious of how you define globalization, because we can see globalization or define it from different perspectives.
Exactly.
Usually when we talk about globalization, especially within the context that you have defined it, we are actually looking at the impact of globalization on the way and manner things are done within a community or a country. And as I don't know who the lady who just spoke is talking about the principles on which globalization itself is being practiced.
Exactly.
And most of the time, no matter how we define globalization, globalization doesn't only go in the context of the people that are being impacted by it, but the way our view of globalization itself within the context in which we define globalization. And it can varies from different perspectives, if you ask me. So I think your definition really falls about we really looking at globalization based on its effects. And the effect will not change if it is being practiced within Africa or African in the West. It is the impact that we are talking about in this context, I think. Maybe I'm just adding to it. So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.